I'm great. Thanks so much for being on the event today, Pat.
Yeah, it's good to join you again.
Excellent. Take it away.
All right, perfect. So we are going to walk through how to look at evaluating disaster recovery as a service providers. And to do that, we're going to walk you through some of the things that we see people thinking about when they try to figure out how to do disaster recovery as a service, whether to do it themselves, do it in the cloud, how to pick a cloud provider. And just to give you a little background about Bluelock, we were founded in 2006. We were the first VMware vCloud service provider. And we've been hosting production and disaster recovery since basically day one. But things really got interesting when replicating data moved up off of the storage array to the hypervisor stack, and suddenly you're able to replicate data from basically any virtual data center to any other virtual data center or to a virtual cloud service. So we're recognized by Gartner and IDC as leaders in that space and innovators in that space. I'm going to walk you through, oops, that's my alarm that I should be giving you guys a webinar, so I'm glad I made it on time. What are some of the things that drive this conversation? So I don't know if everybody's been to this website before, but if you Google security infographic or security events, hack events, graphic, you'll get this application. It's actually a dynamic website, so these balls are actually moving around. They're meant to represent the size of the incident, the number of users were affected, whether it was cloud, whether it was private infrastructure, et cetera, so on. So why would I show a security diagram when we're trying to talk about disaster recovery? Well, the main thing is that it's all coming together as a same conversation, because for the most part, when you have a security event, it causes some form of outage or disruption to your environment the same or very similar way that a power event would, or a storage array corruption, something like that you're probably more used to planning for. And what's occurring is this is getting the attention at the board level, at your end customers, maybe your business units are asking about it, and they're trying to figure out what's your strategy going to be to improve availability in general and for security type events. The other phenomena that we're seeing is that organizations are getting very comfortable with using the cloud for certain specific applications or use cases. So if you look at service management, you've got ServiceNow, CRM, Salesforce, NetSuite, predominant there. HR, ERP, it's Workday. For new application development, people are going to Amazon or Microsoft Azure in many cases. And email could be Google Apps or Office 365, and we're certainly, as I mentioned, known as a leader in the disaster recovery cloud space. The other thing that we're seeing is that in other technology adoption life cycles, there are certain industries that tend to go first, and they're usually driven there because they can save money, they can make money, they are in a very competitive space, they're trying to reduce the risk to their business, something like that. And they're willing to try a newer or a less traditional approach to gain those advantages. And then the rest of the crowd kind of sits back on the fence and says, well, we'll let those folks go first and see what they find out. What we've seen that's different about looking at reinventing your disaster recovery strategy, and in particular using a cloud-based target instead of building your own second data center or leveraging a colo, is that pattern doesn't seem to exist that we're used to. So just a sample of our clients, we have a large wealth management firm, we've got an airline, we've got law firms, automotive companies, retailers, banks, and healthcare systems. And healthcare and legal in particular, and if you imagine airlines as well, they tend to be more risk averse in terms of testing new technology because of the level of risk it might introduce into their day-to-day operations. The reason that we believe they're looking at disaster recovery differently than that is because of the obvious. Disaster recovery itself, if you perform it better, it actually reduces the overall risk to the other applications. You're also typically not messing with or moving production around, so that risk that gets created normally when you fiddle with something or you introduce new technology in a production environment doesn't exist, because it's really happening in a secondary environment where any learning you might do or any changes you might make aren't going to have the impact. So the other thing that we're seeing is this is pulling security availability all into the same room. So a number of friends of mine that are CISOs, they have recently inherited both or either their business continuity and disaster recovery practice, or just the IT disaster recovery practice. And that's not a new thing for them, or I'm sorry, understanding the risks around that, because they're used to being security practitioners and responding to events, that part of it they have down. The idea of running 2 data center locations, managing the replication of all the data, doing the testing and recovery and whatnot is kind of a new thing for them. So they're really good at responding to emergencies, but the day-to-day operations of running 2 environments, particularly if one is cloud, is kind of new. So how does everybody get started? When you try to figure out, what journey is appropriate for me based on where I'm at, we found 3 pretty common patterns. So we made this chart, and the idea is that getting to where you want to go, from where you are to where you want to be. So if you think about today, there are, believe it or not, and I don't mean this to be offensive to anyone on the call, some folks that today only have a backup solution. They may take the backup off-site, they may send it to Iron Mountain to store it, but there isn't really any kind of real-time replication going between their production application, their data center, and somewhere else. So if you think about that world, a really easy first step would be simply to add some form of internal disaster recovery. So you rent a cabinet in a co-location facility, you buy a copy of Zerto or Veeam, DoubleTake. There's a lot of technologies that will move data, and you put some storage in there, maybe a server or 2, and you start moving the data around. But if you think about the fact that you were only running backups initially, that was probably because you're in a fairly cost-sensitive environment, and you may have a fairly focused IT team. It might be small, or they just might be really focused on normal day-to-day operations. The idea that suddenly you're going to be able to run 2 locations, all the data replication and all of that, it looks great on a PowerPoint or a whiteboard, but in your culture, that's probably not going to be a fit. So those folks typically value going straight to the cloud. So they will figure out how to use a storage-based cloud, something like AWS, where it's more about just getting the data off-site, or if they want to have an environment that's more compatible with the VMware infrastructure they have or the IBM infrastructure they have, they might pick somebody like Bluelock, and they don't have to convert images from vSphere VMs over to AMIs and that kind of thing. That, and as we'll talk about in a minute, they can actually tap into some of the services around managing it that, again, with a smaller, a fairly focused team, that would need to be able to get that done successfully. So the other pattern that we're seeing is if you take companies today that have internal disaster recovery already, they're looking at things like a hardware refresh. So I don't know how often you might refresh your hardware. We're hearing anything from between 3 and 5 years. So you suddenly, your array, your spinning Rust or spinning disk array is starting to get a little long in the tooth, and you're thinking maybe I need to build the next cluster out with a flash-based solution from Pure or someone like that, Tintree. You put that in place on your plan, and you're thinking, man, it would be really nice to be able to actually add disaster recovery in some way, shape, or form to that architecture, because I'm going to invest in redoing it all. I might as well take it up a notch. The temptation there is to go and, again, go to a co-location facility. If you happen to have 2 buildings on the same campus or something like that, you can put fiber in, you can put expensive Ethernet links in place. The challenge is then, well, now you're buying if you want to do it right, you've got to buy the exact same infrastructure that you just refreshed in production at your DR site so that when you do fail over, you actually have the capacity to be able to run all the applications at the same time. Well, that's where a disaster recovery as a service approach really gives you an ability to be more efficient. So in most cases, the running state in a DR environment is just storage, and all the compute, the network capacity, the disk I/O, a lot of the services like backups and things that you would need if you're going to stay in the DR environment for more than a few hours, those are all available from the DR provider, and you just turn them on as you need them. So you clearly need to make less, you clearly need to make less of an investment there than you would in the core infrastructure. But you still have the same challenge around managing the service and the operations. So some folks are, instead of going to just pure DRaaS, they're actually going to a fully managed environment. And we'll dig into that a little bit later, but it basically gives you access to a disaster recovery team that can manage the operations, testing, and change management for you, and not just provide infrastructure. So the third scenario we're seeing are companies that have already successfully migrated either to a infrastructure-based DRaaS or a fully managed DRaaS environment. Because they've outsourced some of the operational pieces or maybe even some of the service components, they can now look at some of their higher priority applications and think, well, is it possible for me to even reduce the downtime further by converting it to an active-active environment? So Exchange DAG, if you're not familiar with that is, it's the way that Microsoft has the current version of Exchange can actually run in two geographically separate locations in tandem. And if you lose one, the mail will simply start running out through the other one. So it's near zero downtime for a full single data center failover event. And a lot of the teams we work with don't have the knowledge of how to do that, or maybe necessarily the financial resources to put that in place. So when they are able to free up time and money by going to a DRaaS solution on the rest of the infrastructure, they're able to sit down and actually figure out how to do that. In addition, some providers like Bluelock actually have a blueprint template and an environment that's already set up to support Exchange DAG. So we can basically just move your Exchange environment into it and help you configure it and get it up and running even faster. So the other piece that we're seeing is that this conversation around disaster recovery is not about just technology. There are a lot of other components when you start to think about how the impact of a disaster event would affect the entire business. So the three biggest pieces that we see people think about are the strategy in their IT organization as they look out over the next 1, 2, or 3 years. And if you think about what your existing expertise is, circa 2014, there are a lot of infrastructure skill sets, there are a lot of hands-on security skill sets, there might be some air conditioning management skills, rack and stack folks, things like that, right? And if you ask an organization the talent that they think that they need at the CEO level moving forward, they're going to say, well, I would love to have some more software developers. I've heard all about this DevOps thing. I'd love to be able to automate some of the tasks that are in my environment today. And boy, as I start to embrace more software as a service and cloud, I start to worry a lot about security and who's going to manage this new infrastructure that I'm building out there that I can't even see. So they really want their folks to shift over to that moving forward. Well, coming up with the brilliant idea to build a second data center and fill it up with hardware is exactly the opposite of becoming a software developer or looking at investing in a DevOps automation skill set to help your company deploy out, 3,000 smart devices to their sales force. Another thing that we think a lot about are what we call constituents, and we'll open up this a little bit further, but it's what parts of the organization outside of the IT organization are actually worried about the availability of technology. And this is one that gets me pretty excited because as a lifelong technologist since I was about 11 years old, I've always felt like I was an outcast or, I was the geek that hopefully one day would inherit the earth just like everybody says. And the good news is I think we won. I didn't hear any applause. I didn't get a bottle of champagne for this. I'm guessing you guys didn't either, but if it's not clear the role that technology plays in everything we do today, then people clearly have been living on an island. So huge victory for IT, but that also means we've got to be part of all these other dialogues that are happening inside of the company where we work. The final piece is it's very easy to take something in architecture, especially if you spent some time doing infrastructure for a while. You go buy 2 storage arrays, you buy 2 sets of compute, Cisco UCS, network it all together. Maybe you use virtual networking or software-defined networking. Maybe you go physical, old school, whatever you want to do, and get all that up and running one time. Maybe even having a great partner that can help you do that. But suddenly, you start to have to operate it. You have to manage security around it, change management, all these event scenarios. What happens if? The big one being, what happens if you personally are not around when it breaks, right? So all these things start to have to run a lot more like a service, and that's not necessarily the world that most of us came from. So one tool that we've used to help people figure out what their strategy is and what their organizational culture is around IT moving forward is this notion of what we call A to C or C to F projects. And the A to C, C to F, that's simply a report card grade. So if you took a project like delivering email every day and you said, well, I did an amazing job. Like you go home at night and you tell your significant other, man, I really nailed it with the email today. And by the way, the CEO came in my office and actually gave me a high five for getting the email delivered successfully. That never happens, right? People just assume it's going to work. The best grade you'll get at the end of a quarter or in a year when you're evaluated is maybe a C. You ran email as far as they know as well as anybody else did. But if that freaking email is down for 5 minutes, much less a couple hours, you're in big trouble. So you go straight to F. Now, if you look at the converse of that and you say, well, what are my A to C projects in my organization? So I've taken all these KTLO, keep the lights on things, storage array maintenance, backups, disaster recovery. I've kind of put those on a list. What's the stuff that I could actually get an A for? And you look at rolling out mobile, rolling out a new application that creates a new opportunity for your company, opening up 10 new offices for your organization if you're expanding and growing. Those types of things, maybe converting a traditional application you have over to a SaaS-based solution that has all these new features and is available to your team all around the country or the world. Even if you're really slow, right? So you were supposed to roll out 1,000 iPhones a month and you only get 500 a month because it was a little more complex than you thought. Those 500 people are still thrilled. They know you're going to get the next 500 next month. You're transforming the organization. Worst grade they're going to give you is a C because you're in the middle of what the business is trying to accomplish. If the project runs well, you could get a B or an A. So work with your company to try and figure out what projects they think are in one or the other. And if DR and availability land in C to F, it might be worth trying to outsource it so that you can focus on A to C. When we talk about constituents, we see this breaking into 4 groups. And these have been present in every organization I've worked with to some degree or another. So the technical team, this is typically IT. Sometimes it includes software developers. And when this is the team making all the decisions around availability, they tend to focus on how efficient it's going to be, the tools they're going to use to operate it. Is it something they've used before? Is it something new? They want to make sure they can cover as much of their existing data center. Some of it might be virtual. Some of it might be physical Oracle environment. Some of it might be appliances. How do I make sure I protect everything and make it as easy as possible? And then what are the scenarios that I'm going to have to go through if something actually happens? Because it's probably going to be me, the IT person, woken up at 3 in the morning to actually make this work. So how does the testing work? How's failover, fail back? What we see if you go a little bit beyond the technical team is a lot of direction now coming from executive and board level. And these are typically folks that have been exposed to a security incident, hopefully not at your organization, or a downtime incident, again, hopefully not yours, but from somewhere else. Maybe they were at a conference and someone made it a little more real. Maybe they're looking at the charts that I showed earlier, or they've read something in USA Today or seen it on CNN. But the reality is their job is to start to protect the whole business from both an uptime and security, especially services that drive customer impact or revenue at the end of the day. They want to have a much deeper understanding of risk because they're typically liable for not only the system being down, but whatever the impact is to the business that you have to report back to shareholders or whoever the investors are, the owners are in the business. And they want to know it's going to work. They want some kind of evidence or proof so that when they stand up in front of a quarterly meeting and they present to the board that they're not committing fraud or essentially being ignorant and saying things that aren't true at the end of the day. They also have a very little understanding of technology, so it's really tough for them to talk about the brand new array controller that you just bought and the new gigabit Ethernet circuit you put in place and that copy of whatever software, and somehow attach all these components to the fact that this is actually going to work if there's a fire in our building or a power outage that lasts for more than a few hours. So you've got to kind of help them do that. The other thing that we're seeing is that business units, especially the ones that are closely tied to a manufacturing process or an e-commerce process, something that impacts hardcore numbers for the business, are starting to take some responsibility to make sure that they're protected and their systems are protected on their own. They have a huge reliance on the IT systems, of course, but they tend to get more into the RTO and RPO requirements because they want to get down to like how much data am I actually going to lose. If I'm a pizza delivery company, how many pizza transactions are going to be lost? How much revenue does that turn into? How many unhappy customers is that? And then, by the way, if there is a problem, am I going to be able to start sending pizzas again in 15 minutes? Will that be 4 hours, 3 days? I need to know. And then the final group is the external group. And I know some of you probably have auditors internally. They certainly might poke their nose into your world a little bit, but what we're seeing is a lot of this activity is coming in from the outside. So you've got accounting firms, insurance companies, and of course, if you're regulated for healthcare or finance or federal, standards are starting to come in that actually include not just having disaster recovery, but actually being able to test and prove it, and in some cases being able to meet specific availability requirements. So how do you think about all this? It seems like there's a whole ton of stuff to worry about. Well, we've broken it down into 7 stages, and there's really 3 different phases at a high level. So if you look at the first piece of how you figure this out, if you haven't heard this before, some people call it a BIA, but it's a business impact analysis. And you may already know what applications your organization report. You may know what happens when they fail, what the impact is, but or you may have a company come in, a consulting firm, and actually run a report for you. You can do it either way. And in our case, we can actually help you get this data if you don't already have it. But you sort of do that once, you get a piece of information, and then you use it to build your availability solution. Then you go through implementation and onboarding. And again, if you're more a do-it-yourself, but you're just trying cloud, or if you're building the whole solution yourself, this is on you. But if you're working with a service provider, you can kind of dig into exactly, how many people will be involved. Are they going to do the project management, or is it just really a support person that will answer calls if I call? What's that experience going to be like? Once you're implemented on board, you get into an operational state, and this is sort of your day-to-day life. So you built a playbook that contains scenarios on how to recover, things like that as part of the implementation onboarding process. You're in an operational state where you're managing bandwidth connectivity, making sure the data gets moved back and forth, any network congestion you might run into, change management if you're upgrading from 0 to 4.5 to version 5, that kind of thing. You do all that. And then in our case, we've actually started to embed machine learning and intelligence into the data streams and into the replication repositories to produce a recovery health management score. So we're actually really good at predicting how quick your environment will be able to recover and if it's actually what chance of likelihood it's got to recover based on the quality of data that we have. And ultimately, you're going to end up testing this. Some people will do a sandbox. They'll pick a few applications. Some people will do a full failover test. That's a little more rare in our world. But around every 6 months, you're going to want to test this. You're going to learn things. and then you're going to drive that updated data back into your playbook so that it's current and move on. And then I hope this never happens to you. We've had a number of our clients go through this process, unfortunately. It's been all sorts of different forms. But, at some point, you may actually have to do an event recovery. And we've seen 3 different scenarios here. We've seen people do what we call a Ready 5 configuration, which basically means they call us. They've got an event going on in their data center, and they tell us to be ready. So they're not quite sure they want to swing all the users and the traffic over, but they don't want to wait until they know for sure they can't recover, call us, and then go through the whole process from the start. So they call us, and what we do is we basically get everything ready so that within 5 minutes we can have it all fired up from the moment they say go. We have other people who would do disaster avoidance. So if it's a weather-based event and they can kind of see it coming, they'll actually declare the failover before the event actually impacts them. And then obviously you've got the reactive scenario where there was nothing anybody could do, and the malware CryptoLocker got in their data center and wiped everything out, and they're calling us as a means of last resort. So how do we support customers? So in this scenario, there's some choices for you to make, and there's really 2 big components here. I think there's an animation in this slide. Nope, missing. So one is, what's the kind of experience you want with the provider? So Bluelock offers this in the form of assisted DRaaS, and this is where we're basically on your team, but we're not leading your disaster recovery team. So we provide the tools, the templates, the software interface, any support you need, best practice guidance, blueprints, kind of everything that we can do to help you be successful, but ultimately the person managing the disaster recovery process, testing, and et cetera, and so on, is our customer, is you. In the managed disaster recovery environment, we become your virtual disaster recovery team. So it's our project management, it's our event coordinator, it's our testing coordinator. We're building the run books and playbooks with the data that you provide us. We basically have ownership of the process itself. You can start here and shift to this, or you can go the other way. If you maybe had it managed at the beginning and you realize it strategically makes sense for you to hire a disaster recovery coordinator, you can actually then take it back. It doesn't matter. The other decision you have to make is on an application-by-application basis, how quickly do you need it to recover? And obviously that aligns with cost. So Bluelock has 3 environments that you can choose from. We have DRaaS Run, which is a hot environment. It's on all the time. It's instantly available. It's basically a production environment that's been tuned down to only have the elements in it that it needs to run disaster recovery applications online all the time. So you might stick an Active Directory controller in here and treat your DR site like a remote office back office with real-time Active Directory synchronization. This is where you'd put the other side of an Exchange DAG configuration so that it would be on all the time. The DRaaS Ready environment is hypervisor-based replication in most cases. Sometimes it would be Mimics with IBM, or depending on what the platform is that we would be working on with you. But it's data that's being replicated in real time. Typically the RPO is less than a minute, less than 30 seconds. And then in terms of the recovery, the storage is hot all the time, but the compute, CPU, RAM, I/O, et cetera, are all in reserve in the cloud. And if you would actually declare or go to test, we bring those 2 together, rehydrate that environment, as some would call it, and then power it up. And that can be as fast as 5 minutes up to several hours, depending on how much process you have on top of powering up the machines. Some people insist that the application owner, the DBA, the security folks actually have to go in and approve an environment before they release it to the users, so that takes a little bit more time. But the technology here is pretty fast. And then DRaaS Restore is more like a backup as a service offering. It's obviously the lowest cost offering. The storage there is only as fast as it needs to be to store replication data. So think about the kind of disk drives that you would get at maybe a Best Buy or something like that. Very slow, but lots of capacity. And when you would actually declare it in the environment, you actually, the automated process we have moves the data from Restore over to Ready and then powers it up. So depending on if that's a couple terabytes, that's pretty quick. If it's half a petabyte, it can take a long time to move a lot of applications in here. So your RTO can vary from a few hours to maybe even a few days. So the last thing I'm going to walk through is some responsibility expectation alignment. And I'm showing this chart as if you were choosing from Bluelock's assisted model or Bluelock's managed model, but the steps that I'm illustrating are the steps that you would go through to manage a disaster recovery process, even if you did it yourself. So if you look here, these are the same components we talked about earlier. You've obviously got the BIA. In the assisted model, that's something that our customer is doing. In the managed model, we're actually doing the business impact analysis for you. Project management, architectural design, and network, client acceptance testing. In the assisted model, we're helping you with all that. Managed, we actually take care of it for you. Playbook development, here we're providing the templates, the software tools, everything you need to be successful, including as much guidance as you're willing to take from us, because we have a ton of experience here, but it's really up to you to build and own that document and ensure that it's up to date. In the managed model, that's our job, and we're just taking data from you to build it all out. DRaaS operations, change management monitoring, whether the replication's working, whether the data stores have integrity, things like that. The service level agreements, all that kind of thing. We just sort of split the responsibilities here. You see how that breaks down. And then finally, when you get into health management, in this case, most of this we're providing as part of our software portal, so the compliance, security, all those things like that. Those are your responsibility as the client, but we're providing the intelligence to help you do your job through the software and automation that we've built into the portal. Over here, we're playing a role in actually responding to some of these, and these are shared responsibilities because the security goes much further up the stack than the disaster recovery environment. So obviously we can't take all of that on. Recovery testing, very similar. You've got the same, you can do as much testing as you want through self-service. The full tests you schedule every 6 months. And then in terms of the preparation, playbook, project management, all that, again, in assisted, it's mostly on the client, and in managed, it's on Bluelock. So finally, in terms of an event, same type of thing. In the assisted model, we're there for you, but obviously you're the one logging in and trying to fire the environment up. In the managed model, we can actually take the controls from you. If you're impaired, if your cell phone's out of battery, or for some reason you're just not able to get a network connection and log in and perform that, the Bluelock team can start the recovery process on your behalf. In most cases where we've had to do this live, we've been able to take the wheel for an hour or two until our customer has gotten to a safe place where they had connectivity, and then they've taken over from there. So with that, that's all I have in terms of material. I'm happy to take question or two if there's time. David, are we good on time, or do we need to
I think we have time. We have time for a couple questions, Pat. We do have some questions here from the audience. So they're asking about what if they're not 100% virtual? I know not everyone is these days, despite the vision of hypervisor companies. What if they still have some physical servers?
Yeah, so we support both. So we define hybrid two ways. Hybrid is obviously an architecture where there'd be your data center plus our cloud service, and how do you handle the network integration, security, and whatnot between the two locations. But then the other form of hybrid that we're very recognized for is integrating non-virtual systems. The ones that we most commonly integrate with are physical environments. Those are the result of someone not finishing their virtualization journey before they needed to do disaster recovery, or for licensing reason or performance reasons or something. They've got an Oracle environment or something like that that has to sit on physical. And then the final scenario we see that's very common is someone has something that's not x86. So they've got IBM I-Series, P-Series, something like that, and we have different ways to integrate that as well. So we support today, we haven't met a data center that we didn't like.
Got it. Good point. Another question here from the audience is about, they're saying, we currently have Veeam for backup. We're looking at Zerto. What does Bluelock support? Great question.
So today, very similar to supporting the hybrid data center, our strategy is to meet you where you are in your journey. So if you already have an existing Symantec, Commvault, some other backup technology that you've invested in, if you happen to have a partial Zerto deployment that maybe you started doing yourself and you didn't quite finish and you decide you really need to go to cloud with Zerto, or if you've got a Veeam environment that you put in for backup and you like the idea of Cloud Connect and Veeam replication, so you sort of want to involve your backup strategy into a cloud provider model. We support all those technologies today. We do a lot of the physical, non-virtual environments and a lot of the non-x86 environments with products from DoubleTake. So again, we really haven't met a technology there that we don't like.
Excellent, excellent. And then I've gone ahead and popped up the next poll question here for the audience. And while they answer that, another question here is about can I test my DR for myself, or can Bluelock do the testing for me?
Yeah, another very good question. So we break the testing down into two components. There's the infrastructure testing, where we're basically standing up hardware or instantiating virtual environments on hardware or pushing your data onto physical assets that might be multi-tenant and powering it up, bringing the operating systems online, and then making sure that whatever system is brought up actually matches the latest and greatest copy that was replicated to us. And then some operating system level checks on top of that. Bluelock does all of that work for you in either scenario, whether it's assisted or managed. You may push the button, but it's our infrastructure and automation that actually does all of that work. If you are in the managed model, Bluelock can actually start to run things above and beyond that are in your recovery playbook on your behalf, again, if you're detained or unable to do that. One scenario, David, that we're seeing that's starting to get increasingly common as these environments get larger is that people are asking us to actually, even if their team is available to start the recovery, when you're looking at 3 or 4 people as part of an IT organization, an emergency, they can maybe work on 5 or 10 applications at a time. And if you have 200 applications you have to recover, wouldn't it be nice if somebody actually started working on another 5 or 10 on your behalf, kind of in parallel with you? So that's the scenario that we're starting to see is more common, is not to displace IT or do it while they're impaired, but actually working in tandem with them to make them able to recover more of the environment more quickly.
Got it. Yeah, sounds good, Pat. Sounds like you guys have a lot of really good DR expertise there. I mean, that seems to be the big differentiator to me with Bluelock is the expertise you guys have around doing this with so many different types of companies. Thanks for joining us today, Pat.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.